let me take you to the question of the future of naval warfare and how it's adapting. You've studied naval warfare through the millennia,
Yes.
actually. Where do you see naval warfare going? And are the navies, whether it's the Royal Navy or the U.S. Navy, from your standpoint, thinking about the challenge in the right way? What naval war would look like, for example, a high-intensity conflict, if you're dealing with, for example, Chinese forces
Yes.
as they're staging themselves, and Russian forces in terms of their demonstrated capability not only on land, but what we know about how they would fight at sea.
We're moving back towards state-on-state conflict. We're moving back towards very high levels of technology being used. Land-based missiles against forces at sea, engagements between ships using missiles and aircraft and so on. So it's back to the future. And one thing that worries me about this idea of this rather austere frigate is that if this was 20 years ago, it would have made a great deal of sense. But now, when we're moving back to a context in which every ship has to be quite highly competent, I wonder if this is the best way forward, even though it will increase numbers and make the Royal Navy look better, at least on paper.
And let me ask you one quick damage control question, if I may. If you looked at, we build ships to a very, very robust standard historically to be able to be battle damage resistant. But if you look at newer generations of strike missiles, if you look at newer generations of torpedoes, it's very unlikely that a lightly built small ship is going to survive. Should that change the way we fundamentally design these ships? And nobody ever wants to talk about the issue of disposability. That was raised in the case of the littoral combat ship and was seen as such a third rail that a whole bunch of engineering went into it to say, well, look, we have to give this an X degree of survivability. Is you don't want to ever say this, but is that to a degree no longer relevant given the deadliness of the kind of generations of weapons that are coming down the road?
I've heard it argued that in the Cold War, armour was not used because the thought was that the war would go nuclear and everything would get sunk in the first few hours or the first few days. We learned in the Falklands War in particular, we Brits, of the problems in damage control, and we hadn't got damage control quite right. It was an enormously good lesson for us, and this has meant, I think, that damage control in British ships has been second to none, and an example to everyone. Whether the US Navy has learnt the same, although it suffered damage in the 1980s, the Stark, the frigate, and Samuel B. Roberts, whether they have learned the lessons is a moot point too. It's a little worrying that those collisions that they've recently had caused such serious damage. I mean, I know a big ship striking a small one, but the fact casualties were quite heavy and so on. Yes, the flooding was stopped. But there are concerns here. There's nothing like experience. And another thing that disturbed me this morning was that people who should really have known better, I won't mention names, said you can do away with a lot of these unnecessary naval standards. I've heard that before, and it's always ended in disaster.